Now, you know that the theme for our celebration today is Dare to Lead. And I suspect that there might be a few of you in the audience who are saying, well, how does that relate to me? I don't have the authority. I might not have the courage. Or maybe I just don't have the inclination. But we all know how useful those little voices inside our head are. So, for the next few moments, I would like to invite you to silence that little voice and allow me the pleasure of sharing with you my story. And so, I was actually born in Poland to very hard-working, middle-class parents who dared to move to the other side of the world in order to give their two young children, two girls, aged 3 and 5, a better future. And so my family emigrated to Australia in 1981. After spending 12 months in Austria, in what you might call an immigration camp, we were extremely lucky, and lots of families like ours were being given this opportunity by countries like Australia, Canada, and the United States at the time, because these countries were actively growing their working population. And that very first flight for a young girl aged 5 from Austria all the way to Australia captured my imagination in all things flying, and quite frankly, changed the trajectory of my life forever. I was naturally curious as a child, and it was this curiosity and the amazing support that I had from my parents that actually led me to the decision to become an engineer. I would love working on all sorts of projects, mechanical, with my father in his garage. And I used to ask all of those why questions. Why does it work like this? And working with him helped me to answer those questions. And so I made this choice to be an engineer, and not just any engineer, but an aerospace engineer. And when other family and friends met that decision with only skepticism, it was my mother who said to me that in order to succeed at anything in life, you only needed one person to believe in you. And she said that for me, she would be that person. And so I applied myself, I worked hard, and I was accepted into an aerospace engineering degree, one of only 2 offered in Australia at that time. And when I arrived, I was one of 3 young women in a class of 90. And that wasn't that long ago. That was only 1994. And so I realized in doing this degree that there actually weren't that many roles in Australia within the aerospace industry. And I quickly came to the conclusion that I needed a plan B. So I convinced my professors, I convinced the university that I would enter into what we called in Australia a double degree. I would take on a second bachelor degree. And so I decided to do business administration. And I found the courage and worked hard and studied aerospace engineering during the day and my business administration degree in the evenings. And as my career started to unfold, as my education came to a conclusion, I not only asked those why questions, but we've heard it here already today, I started to ask those rhetorical why not questions. Why couldn't I be a really good engineer? Why couldn't a young lady like me aspire to work in this large industry, to travel the world, to live in other countries? Why couldn't I one day lead a team? And who says that one day I couldn't lead an organization? And it was these "but why" questions that drove me in my career, from engineer to a sales and marketing professional, to a regional sales director, a global sales director, a global program manager, and then executive roles, senior vice president commercial, senior vice president business administration, and then finally to where I am today, managing director of a company. Now, I'm sure, like you, my journey has been anything but easy. It has involved its share of sacrifice, of long nights, of worries, of complexities, of sleepless nights. And yes, I have made mistakes. I remember the very first time as a young engineer that I cried in my manager's office. We had just been presenting projects to a regional director. And during that presentation, a male peer had taken full credit for my work. And in that moment, I stood there and I did nothing. And I learned there and then that I had to find the courage to advocate for myself when there was no one else to advocate for me. I remember the very first time I was asked to lead a team. And as a young engineer, this team was full of men that were much more mature and far more experienced in their engineering careers than I was. And I remember how difficult it was to earn their trust, to establish my credibility as a young female engineer. And I did this by doing all of the small things, the inconsequential, administrative things that no one else in that team wanted to do. And in trusting me with those small things, they began to trust me with the big things. And my credibility, my reputation grew, and we started to work as a team. I recall the very first time I became a manager of managers. And about 6 months into this role, I held quite a large team meeting. And I had nothing short of a revolution on my hands. My team members were accusing me of being disconnected, ill-informed, ill-advised, not understanding any of the issues that they were experiencing within the organization. And I remember that meeting and sitting there, anger welling up inside of me. But I also remember the good sense to sit there and bite my tongue and stay silent and listen to them and tell myself to simply take it and hear them out. And when they finished, I acknowledged their concerns and I found the courage to say, help me to make this better. But one of my most challenging experiences actually came in my executive career, when I joined an all-male executive committee as the first and only female. It was pretty clear from the beginning that I was unwelcomed by some of my peers. And through those boardroom meetings and discussions, they did what they could to question my credibility, my experience, my decision-making. And they played games with me. But more importantly, they made me start to question my own self-confidence. And so when I turned to my HR director and talked to him about this, and he said to me, "Do you want to quit? Have you had enough?" I said, "No. I'm going to stay, and we're going to work this out." And I made it clear that I wasn't doing it for myself because it was hard. I said I was going to do it for every other woman that was going to walk into that boardroom after me. And if I was to ever leave, I would do that on my terms and not somebody else's. So these are just some of the few experiences that I wanted to share with you. And I know you all have your own stories and challenges. So let's return to the subject of leadership. It is my firm belief and my proposition to you here today that you do not have to be a manager, an entrepreneur, a business leader, an executive in order to lead. We heard it here today, this afternoon. Leadership is not a title. It is not power. Okay? Leadership is not a position. Leadership and to lead is an action. We heard it here today. It is an action. It is your ability to take someone by the hand, physically or metaphorically, and show them the way, to be an example. It's your ability to raise your voice, advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. It's your ability to do something when everyone around you does nothing. It's your ability to make a difference and to change the status quo. So what does it mean to make a difference? So I've spent many years in my career mentoring other women. It's something I'm incredibly passionate about and something which is just so important. But I soon recognized that while I was helping these other women to be more resilient, I was actually doing very little to change the environment around them. And so in the more recent years in my career, I made the very conscious decision to start to mentor men as well. And with the more and more men that I've mentored across various organizations, that's when I've started to see changes in behavior. So what happens? Because these men start to experience the power of diversity through these diverse mentoring relationships, they then go out and start to seek advice from a much wider pool of people, not just their regular go-to people. Then they'll start to question the makeup of their teams, who is sitting around their table. Then they'll go on to start questioning their hiring practices. Are they attracting a diverse pool of candidates? And so on and so on. And that's when real change starts to happen. In my experience, many women today, and myself included at the time, are over-mentored and under-sponsored. We do everything we can to change the women in these businesses and organizations, but we do so little to change the environment around them. And that's why men are so important to this conversation, because we're only going to drive sustainable change together. Now, many of you will know that it wasn't until World War I and World War II that in this country, in the UK, women, for the very first time, came out of their home from their domestic duties and they took on paid employment. And not just any paid employment, but they took on the roles that were being traditionally occupied by men. Because, of course, these roles were left vacant when our men courageously went off to war. And the statistics show that in 1918, 5 million women were employed across the UK in these non-traditional roles. It's the first time that women were paid for working in shops and offices. Women started to take on jobs as typewriters. That's what they were called. And then they were given more complex tasks like bookkeeping and controlling the telephone switchboards. Women took a much more active role in farming because food production was so important during that war period. And they started to operate and then maintain heavy machinery, not only in agriculture, but in many other industries. They were also employed in the munitions factories, making all sorts of delicate things there. But despite taking on the roles that were vacated by their male peers, women were still paid less, and in many instances, as half as much. And it wasn't until 1970, so that's 52 years later from World War I, that the UK brought in the Equal Pay Act, and it became law to pay men and women the same salaries and wages for equal work. Now, it really saddens me that it took these great wars for women to be able to take on roles traditionally occupied by men. It saddens me that it took these incredible and awful events in our history that we finally began a conversation around equal opportunity and diversity and inclusion. And what saddens me even more, that 100 years on, fast forward to today, so much and yet so little has changed. Take the FTSE 100. So these are the top 100 listed companies across the UK. Only 6 of those companies are led by female CEOs. The statistic isn't any better elsewhere in the world. Across the water in the US, take the Fortune 500 companies, only 25 of those companies are led by female CEOs. That's the same statistic, if not slightly worse. And if we look across the entire globe, women occupy less than a quarter of all senior roles across global organizations. And that number today is falling. It is not increasing. So I ask you this question: do we dare do nothing? I'm so incredibly proud to have joined my Boeing family, who is here with me today. This is an organization that really has put diversity and inclusion at the heart of its corporate values and behaviors. So yes, we employ about 2,500 people across the UK. We're incredibly passionate about UK prosperity. We invest in our people. We invest in STEM. We partner with local schools and universities. We've built our very first European manufacturing facility right here in Yorkshire, in Sheffield. Our apprenticeship program was voted this year the #1 engineering apprenticeship amongst the School Leavers Awards earlier this year. And we're incredibly proud to support our veterans and be an employer of choice for our ex-service men and women. I have been nothing but supported and empowered to run my business here in the UK since joining the organization. Boeing wants to make a difference. I know there are companies out there that want to make a difference. I want to make a difference. I don't just want to be remembered as the person who breaks a glass ceiling. I want to be the type of leader that creates an organization where glass ceilings simply don't exist. I want to lead and I want to take action so that our companies, our industries reflect the rich diversity of the world within which we live. And so today, I ask you to join me. Recognize the leader in each and every one of you. Let's grab hold of this challenge. Let's not wait for anybody else. Have courage in the face of adversity. Advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. Stand up for what you believe in. Make a difference, and above all, take action. Let's dare to lead together. Thank you very much.